Charleston City Council passed a measure last week to establish a TIF for the upcoming Union Pier project. Today, I talk one-on-one with Charleston City Mayor William Cogswell Jr. for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups, sponsored by Jamel President and the Day Foundation. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Charleston Mayor William Cogswell Jr. Welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups for the 11th time.
11th time, man. Who's counting?
A memory popped up on my Facebook feed. I'm like, oh, I gotta tell him about this.
All right. We go way back.
We do indeed. Obviously, now you're Charleston Mayor. You've been busy with a lot of issues from Union Pier to Similar Street. Let me go to the obvious first, which is obviously Union Pier. As you know, Charleston City Council, that is, passed a measure last week, Monday, to establish a Tax Increment Financing District, better known as TIF, at the Union Pier. The city says this will open the doors to create a world-class park, enhance public access to our historic waterfront, provide more attainable housing options, and of course, implement resilient options. The City Council obviously agreed to the passage of two intergovernmental agreements with the Charleston County School District and Charleston County, as you know, the first of its kind here in the city of Charleston. These agreements will allow the county to acquire additional parking spaces, benefiting the county's financial outlook. And I should mention too, Mayor, obviously the Charleston County School District will acquire the third floor at 75 Calhoun Street, which is currently leased by the city, enabling the consolidation of its staff and saving approximately $14 million annually, as they have been relying on trailers for office space in North Charleston. Let me ask you this. I know there are two different drafts for Union Pier, if I'm not mistaken. Which particular draft will the city actually be using for this?
So we only have one draft. What was confusing, I think, in the last council meeting was that the Charleston County School District did their own financial projections, which were guided by their own assumptions. And per state statute, the city of Charleston is required to pay for another government entity that seeks a financial analysis. So it was draft to the city of Charleston, but it was ordered and at the request of the school district. So we did our own. We had a few different iterations of it, but the final draft was sent around to council, and we've recirculated it and made it public. So there's really only one set of projections from the city standpoint, and what we're basing all of our economic analysis off of.
I want to get back to that in just a second, but what was different between the rough draft and the final draft that you sent to City Council?
One draft assumed that the property would continue to appreciate. The more conservative, which is what we went with, assumed that the values after a certain period of time, I think it was after about 25 years, was capped or went flat, which is, I mean, frankly, pretty, I would say, overly conservative, because there's no real example except for maybe a 1 or 2 year period during the recession and a 6-month period during COVID where property values seem to go down, but they quickly recovered. And if you look at a historic trend, they go up.
How much does that historic trend go up in the next 10, 20 to 30 years?
If I knew that, Quintin, I probably wouldn't be sitting here. But the reality of it is, I think if you're betting on Charleston in the long run, you're going to do just fine.
Why not, Mayor, in your mind, have a council meeting after this particular vote?
This has been discussed in some level of detail, both individually with council members and going back to when we first initiated this back in February. So, you know, it's always one of these things. Some people think it's rushed. Other people think it takes too long. What was clear to me is that the time was right to do this. We had a good buyer. We had a willing seller. We had a public process that this property had gone through for over the course of a year with the low plan. We knew what the public generally wanted, and so I saw it as an opportunity, and fortunately council saw it the same way, as did the school board, as did Charleston County Council. So it's just it's exciting to see all these different governing entities come together for what I think is going to be a spectacular project.
You all may not have seen it as a rush project, but do you believe the public felt that way?
I'm sure you can find some people that think it was rushed, but again, a public process that went from February until last week isn't rushed to me. Now, I know government is always known to move slowly. That's not my MO. I've got into this job to do things, and that's what we're going to do.
You talked about last week, Mayor. So how many votes from City Council did you have prior to this vote?
I think the vote was 10 or 11 to 1 or something. I can't remember. I mean, it's in the record, but we had one person that was opposed to it because he felt that the port should pay more or participate more, and another person that abstained because he wanted more information.
What more information do you want from this?
I think we're in a pretty good place right now. We're going to make sure that frankly, the city has a lot of control right now. They have the control of the purse strings. We have control over the zoning. So it's pretty clean to me that any design or public works project or park or building or street sign that goes up in Union Pier will have to come before City Council for approval in some form or fashion. And that requires, based on the way we've been set up for quite some time, a very public process.
You talk about that public process. Obviously, the previous developer received input from the community, but now that information, Mayor, has been null and void. So how can you actually satisfy the community now?
Because again, there is no plan right now. I think that's what everybody's confused by, is that what is the plan for Union Pier? It's not defined. And as it becomes defined, it's going to be a very public process. So where we're going to go from here is we're going to start with guiding principles, which are largely known: lower density, more in keeping with the historic district, resiliency, public access to the water, green space, affordable housing. Like all of these things have been hammered over the past 24 months. So you'll start with the guiding principles. Then we're going to modify our comprehensive plan, which should have been done years ago, but we're going to modify our comprehensive plan to codify, if you will, those principles. So get a little bit more layer of detail with some teeth to it.
Okay.
And then the final step will be, and both of those two processes will be public. The final step will be the PUD, or Planned Urban Development initiative that will get way more into the weeds. But you'll start out here, you'll come here, and then you'll get down to here. And each three of those steps, I'm committed to being a very public process. So I think the community is going to be very much in the know and very much engaged in this, which is as it should be.
But Mayor, you just mentioned to me that obviously the plan for Union Pier has not been defined. If that's the case, why even have a vote on this?
Because we had to set up the ability to open up a bank account for public infrastructure. That was the key. What they were doing previously was, to me, cart before the horse. They were going in with a plan with hundreds of millions of dollars in assumed infrastructure improvements without a defined way to pay for it. They talked about a TIF, but they didn't socialize it with the county and they didn't socialize it with the school board. So it was never defined. It was never set up. So to me, that's a backwards way of doing it. So what I said to the port and to the potential buyer, I said, look, we need to set up a TIF first. And they agreed with that. I mean, they were very much on the same page. Because if you can't set up a TIF, it's no use in planning it, because there's not going to be public money to pay for public infrastructure. It's probably not worth anything, to Councilman Gregg's point, but more to the point and more to the public's interest, it would just sit and be nothing. It would continue to be a port terminal of some sort behind razor wire, and the public would have no access to it. And to me, that's the worst of all cases.
Those infrastructure plans. What else do you hope to have down there at Union Pier?
I think we're going to have significant public space, park space. We're going to have the waterfront by March open to the public.
Okay.
We're going to work on pretty significant resiliency and flooding needs, including the extension of the battery up the Eastern Peninsula. We're going to focus on some pretty significant affordable housing initiatives. Both on site, but also within very close proximity, which are kind of in the works now. So, you add all that up, I think there's, coupled with the just general infrastructure of extending Washington Street and Concord Street and reknitting the urban fabric back together, it has been cut off from residents and visitors alike for generations. Again, I think it's a really exciting prospect.
I was just back there early this morning, but let me ask you this. With those affordable housing options, how many units do you plan to have over there for Union Pier?
That's to be determined. I would say that we did just get a report. We've been working with Bloomberg Foundation, and, our affordable housing need is pretty acute. And again, this is not just low-income housing. This is, people that are teachers. It's the city employees, people that, are driving 40 miles to and from work. So we have a 3,500 unit need and over the next 7 years. And over the past 7 years, we've been able to deliver only 499 units. So we need to really focus on this. And I can promise you that it is a huge initiative of mine, because it's not just an economic issue, it's a very real social issue as well.
Well, let me ask you this quickly. I have to ask you this, but so do you want affordable housing and workforce housing in this plan? Yeah. Okay.
I define affordable as 60% of AMI up to 120. But you can't just all do 120 AMI. You have to do 60s, you have to do 80s, you have to do 100, so it's staggered. And then you can have some others that are market rate. The Housing Authority is looking at doing programs like that. It's proven to be much more, much better for the community, frankly, because it's not like, oh, that's where the poor people live. I mean, you don't want to stigmatize it. You don't want to define something, as this is where people that 60% AMI live. That's not the Charleston way in my mind.
I wanted to go to this because you just mentioned some of those city employees who are traveling so many miles to get to where they are. 2 George was just created a couple of years ago, and now 75 Calhoun, as you know, is going to be vacated for offices in West Ashley. How will all of this, Mayor, affect the city's bond rating?
It won't affect the bond rating because the Union Pier TIF, we have the highest bond rating that exists for municipalities. And so kudos to those that came before me to ensure that maintained, and I will continue to maintain it. But that's the importance of a TIF, because a TIF gives a dedicated revenue stream that doesn't impact the city's bond rating. If we didn't have that, it would probably have a pretty significant dent in the city's bond rating if we wanted to do any sort of public infrastructure. So this is a guaranteed or dedicated revenue source that's pretty important.
And last question, how much is the West Ashley property will cost the city to move the city employees over there?
To be determined. We have a pretty holistic space need, and the idea of putting everybody at 3 George, or 2 George, is a good one, but we've run out of space there. And so we need to expand. Downtown is not inexpensive. That deal with the school district was a little wonky to begin with, when we had this really long-term lease, and it was just kind of this hybrid that, frankly, in my mind, needed to be cleaned up and prevented significant upfits to that building that are, I think, much needed. So I think this is a much cleaner approach. I think this will be more accommodating to a lot of our employees, because most of our employees do not live on the peninsula of Charleston, and it is more of a burden for them to come downtown often than it is for them to be in satellite areas. And I think West Ashley is an area, especially being right across from the $350 million Sumar redevelopment, is a great opportunity.
Yes, sir. Well, I thank you for your time here on Quintin's Close-Ups, and I want to thank Jamel President and Dave Foundation for sponsoring this interview.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see you, man.
Likewise.
Yeah.